Chad, welcome to Endurance Minded. How are you today?
I'm good, Taylor. Thank you for having me. I very much appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive in. Let's start where I like to start with every guest that I have on the show, which is let's start with your story. Give us a little bit of background. What brought you to where you're at today?
Looking into the things, I was doing my due diligence. And so, we're looking into your show, the endurance mindset, and looking at everything. I see the mountain biking. I see a lot of endurance stuff that you've done. My history grew up racing BMX bikes as well. So I grew up, I was a BMX rider. I love extreme sports. The more fear, the better. I did dabble around in mountain biking just a little bit, but cross country was around at that time. And that really wasn't for me. If I would have had the dual downhill, that would have been awesome, So at the time, I started doing the BMX stuff and, developing my self-identity, I guess, is where that comes around. And then later on, I went and played football and wrestled and, went to Arizona State to a couple of years, exercise science. So my background's in kinesiology. I had an injury my senior year, which is kind of what helped me. And I've kind of talked to people about this is that, I knew what I wanted to do in the future, the BMX, the sports. I just created the athlete that was inside me. So I knew that was something that I wanted to do. And currently I'm an owner of Move Human Performance Center in Phoenix or Chandler, Arizona.
That's great. I love that. BMX actually is what kind of got me into it when I was a kid. I saved up. I grew up on the coast in South Carolina, and there was this little bike shop that was a BMX shop at the beach. And I never, had bikes, but didn't know what all that was about. And this was in the late 80s, early 90s. And did some chores and saved up some money and bought a BMX bike. And that really is what kind of set me. Now that I look back, I didn't realize it at the time, but that's what kind of set the wheels in motion. I stayed connected to riding bikes ever since. And that was super fun, sport.
That's what we did back in the days, right? We all got on bikes and we rode around. Kids don't do it nowadays.
Yeah.
They don't do it. So
no, that was the machine. You got a bike and that opened doors, right? You could go anywhere and.
Yeah. I remember getting in trouble. My mom, they would take one pedal off, so you couldn't ride it. They would take the bike, but then you'd find another one, So then they just took the one pedal off so you couldn't ride it, So that was, the things that we had to endure at those times. Right?
Yeah, that's a great little trick from your mom. I actually never thought about that. But you can't get very far with one pedal.
Yeah, no, and it's just sitting right there. You wish you could ride it. You're like, but dang. So now you're calling around asking if somebody's got an extra Shimano pedal or whatever. So, instead of borrowing somebody else's phone, right? When you get your phone taken away now, you go find somebody else's. The kid's got somebody else's phone.
Sure. Well, I know a lot of what you focus on now is kind of the mental side of things. We'll call it, mental performance. I know you also work with athletes and other individuals on rehabilitation coming back from injuries and everything from professional athletes to folks that have had traumatic injuries, helping them come back and walk again or, re-engage in life. And so it got me thinking about this, kind of concept of the mental game as it is and how you might train your mind. And so I'm curious, in your opinion, what's the biggest misconception you think people have about mental toughness or kind of training their mindset from all the experiences that you've had?
Yeah, mental toughness is something that everybody says they have, but when you actually get battle tested, very few rise, and especially in this world, us as parents, or us as a generation that we're bringing this new one in, we're trying to keep these kids out of stressful situations, and so we look at the generation or the type of the athlete that's being out there right now, or the type of even just the society that we're producing. We're not trying to put them into bad situations. We're not trying to push the endurance of what they have in life, And this is not just about sport. This is about life too. They can't control outside of the game or outside the field of practice or play. And so how are they going to do it when they get inside? So what I see, we always use the term motor. You got to have a high motor, somebody that's going to be able to go forever, somebody that's going to be willing to take the risk, somebody that's going to be willing to give everything they got. You have to have a high motor. But motor equals dog times conditioning. right? So you have to have a little dog inside you. You have to overcome things. The resilience, right? The ability to battle back over and over and over after something has happened. Or even like you say, you get to mile 17 of the marathon and you know that you're just cramping, the legs are on fire, your body's hurting, but you know that there's a block of them. You know that that's when you hit the wall. Do you have that ability to go over and over and over? Goggins has his own thing, and he's crazy with what he does. But again, that's taking it to the next level. The human body will shut down at 40%. There's still 60% left inside of us. So how do we get them to stress a little bit and push those boundaries? That's kind of the biggest thing that I see. Or that's one of the biggest things that I do is I take them and I get them to believe in themselves. You've got more in the tank. You're not done yet.
So with that in mind, take us a little deeper. What are some of the core components of training that mental piece? Like you said, we're only using 40. We got 60 left, but everything tells us to stop, right? We're tired, we're burnt out, we doubt ourselves, all the negative self-talk. So when that's happening, what are the components of actually training that so that we can get to a place where we have that stronger mental game? We get some of that, like you say, get some of that dog in us.
Yeah. Well, a part of my story as well is if you look into it and if you know, as I spent 3 years in prison, so that was kind of one of the things. And I was thinking about it the other days. I go through and I do some of these discussions. But the biggest thing is the silence. The silence that I had to know, there was a period of time when I'm just sitting there by myself and I have to know who I am and how much longer you have in you or how much do you have to give. And then I started putting that back into Eddie King, my paralyzed guy, BMX Hall of Fame mountain bike champion. When he broke his back up in Big Bear, he's sitting in that hospital bed and I'm sure there's silence. And that silence is when we have to sit down. And even if you don't have something catastrophic happen or something that very dramatic happen in your life, we have to take a time out and enjoy silence. And so that way we have to get to that self-talk. I call it the dark energy. Dark energy is when you're by yourself. It's not negative. It's when you're by yourself and you're in complete silence and you're hearing to nothing but yourself. We have to learn to tune out the noise from external factors. We've got internal cueing. We have external cueing. These kids nowadays, they're playing the game where they're studying for something or training for something, and they're worried about who's in their DMs, how many followers do I have? They're worried about all too many of the outside, the cueing. That's wrong. I need the internal cueing, the ones that say focus, you can do this. You've prepared for this, and then it just goes to how much pain can you endure and how do you handle pain? I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, it strikes me that we don't create a lot of space for silence anymore. Like you said, there's a lot of distraction and it's easier now than ever to fill that silence. When do you, or how do you layer that in, or how do you recommend people create that space? I imagine that's maybe easier said than done to some extent. So how do we create that silence to create that toughness?
Well, you look at the screen time and you look at all the time that we waste, adding time into our life with pollution. When I drive to work, thankfully I've got a short drive to work right now, but when I drive to work, normally in the mornings, I don't have any music on. I sit in my car in silence and I drive. I've got 5 minutes or I've got 8 minutes. It doesn't have to be long. It just has to be enough. I know the military, the Marines, they use a 2-minute timeout when they're in a stressful situation, and it could be, whatever the mission might be, but they have a 2-minute timeout. So it doesn't have to be long, but it has to be just long enough for you to sit there to understand what is the task at hand that you're trying to complete today, or what is it that your goal that you're focused on right now. When you do that, you'll have a better understanding about how to accomplish things.
I love that. Yeah, I find I do the same thing. One of my favorite things to do is to drive in silence.
Yes.
And people always ask me like, "Oh, it's crazy. You don't listen." I'm like, that's the most meaningful time that I have, and I live in Montana and the drives are long, and so I love that, let's take whatever, let's take an hour and just sit in it.
It can even be in the shower, when you're just in the shower, you don't have any music, you have no earpods in or something, but you take that 5 minutes or whatever, an individual, ladies, if they're sitting in the back, whatever it is, you just take that time. But we don't do that. We start talking to ourselves, we start hearing ourselves, when you listen, read the black screen behind your eyelids, close them, and you'll get a better understanding of what you can accomplish.
Yeah. I think it makes me think about people's identity. I think now more than ever, folks really tie their identity to a lot of these distractions, things that they think might make them stronger, making them better. Everybody wants to be busy, and we're doing all these things and occupying our time, like we're talking about, right? You're filling every single gap and space that we have in what we hope is or think is in service of us being better. But I hear you saying, a lot of that's distractions, and that's actually eroding our mental toughness. But what, what are some of the places that people get stuck? All right. When we know that identity drives behavior, and, how does this show up and for people, and where are some of the places you're seeing folks get stuck outside of just the distractions,
Yeah, just distracted. Let's take, my burn survivors, for instance. I got to deal with them, and I've got one right now. His name's JJ, and he's just an awesome kid. He was given a 2% chance to live in when he got to the Maricopa burn unit. He was in a car fire accident that happened and just left him, with catastrophic burns over. I think he has 62% of his burns of his body. Physically, the doctor's got you, and I have a lady that her name's Danica. She works down at the burn unit. So she sends me a lot of the ones that are catastrophic injuries that need that little extra pushing. Should he go to a counselor, or did they want him to go to a counselor? They have. That's been a thing in there because, now you have to understand psychologically how you're going to be able to overcome this new feat. You have to accept the new image that you are. And you talk about self-identity, but it really goes back to our images, I had to do that for a little bit when I got out of prison, and I didn't let nobody know I was a convicted felon. I went back to work the next day, but it was still something that I hid my identity until when I opened up Move Human Performance Center. And one of my old friends says, "Hey, I want you to come on my podcast and tell your story," that I opened it up. That's when my new image came back around, and I knew that my story was going to be able to help people instead of just kind of using it to have that, 1,000-pound weight on my back that was just sinking me down. So I had to learn to bring this new image out and how to handle that. Well, people don't want to do that nowadays. They don't want to leave themselves susceptible. We don't want to open ourselves up. When I wrote this book, I'm currently, my book will be released next month. Told my buddies I used to work with, I said, "Hey, I've got this book coming out and I'm writing it." He goes, "I hope you changed all the names so you don't incriminate all of us." I'm like, "No, I didn't change nobody's names. Because there's no incrimination on anybody except myself, because I left myself vulnerable of the things, the choices that I made, And so now when I give that back to JJ, when he came in, I'm like, "Bro, you have to accept this. You're a burn survivor. Yes, you have scars on your body, but you're here. Your beautiful kids are with you. You have your family, but it's still, again, we always say you have to look in the mirror and know who you are. Every morning when they wake up and they look in the mirror and they see the disfigurement, they see some of the deformities of what they have, are they willing to accept that? And so when we go through and we're willing to accept the new identity, Eddie, the paralyzed, after the back, he had to, and even with spinal cord injuries, you have to accept the new identity and the new body that you're given. Yes, you cannot walk, or some of them can't walk, and some of them we have gotten them to walk. But, once you learn to accept that new identity, then you become, and you can grow into the person that you continually want to be.
I love that. I think we kind of let that identity, we don't often take control or take charge of that. It's a reactive process. And I'm curious, it makes me think about kind of consciously choosing who we become. And it sounds like that was very much your story, right? You could have let that narrative kind of overtake you, right? Or become kind of the only fact. And so what does it look like to consciously choose who you're becoming, consciously choose that identity versus reacting to kind of the old narrative? And I think so many of us get wrapped up in, this is who I have been, or this is what I'm supposed to be, or this is what it's supposed to look and feel like. But you get to choose, right? And every day is a new opportunity. So how do we begin to consciously choose that identity from your perspective?
Well, like I say, it starts with one in a row. You have to know who you are and what you want to be that day growing up. I always say after every dark night, and again, most of this, most of it is we're dealing with, a seclusion. We're talking about people that are lost with their identity, So after every dark night, there's a bright day. The day starts bright. How you wake up and how you look at that, that's the whole biggest thing that you have to figure out. And again, taking everything situational. subconscious choices, what we talked about, or what you were just talking about, those are just patterns. Those are habits. Those are things that we've done. I never thought that I'd be smoking crack in South Phoenix, but it started from selling drugs and doing different things. And unfortunately, that's the road that it took me down. Like I said, Ryder, I got 6 DUIs. Subconsciously, I was just out having a good time. Nothing was ever, crazy, but I had 6 DUIs, and subconscious was to go out and have a good night and then go home and party because I had to be at work the next day, so I drove. When everything is taken away from you, and I've mentioned this before, when your freedom is taken and you're sitting there in a cell and that shit's happening, you got to start thinking about things. And you got to start thinking about how you're going to make a change, So that's where the conscious thoughts start coming in. This is who I am. I've asked my people all day long. One of the biggest questions is that, who are you? Ask somebody. I've asked all my people in my work, and I've done this for the last 6 weeks. Tell me a little something about yourself, right? And they can't say nothing. And it's not because they don't know. A lot of them are afraid to say who they are. They don't want to admit to their failures. They don't want to admit to things that they've done in the back. They really haven't made that conscious choice to think, who am I? They'd want to tell you about their beliefs. Like I have, I'm a college basketball player. I'm a hard worker. No, those are things that you do. Those are not things who you are. So tell me who you are. And really, when you know who you are, that goes back to character, right? I didn't know who I was. These burns, they don't know who they are because your self-identity is constantly changing. It's not fixed. It's flexible. Who you are today is not going to be who you are tomorrow. I was asking a girl a couple of weeks ago, so tell me who you are. She goes, I don't know who I am because I'm not there yet. I won't know who I am until I'm there, And I said, well, that's kind of crazy. You say that because you got to know who you are today to be able to get there. So how are these kids, or how do people go through life not knowing who they are, or thinking like, hey, I'm not there yet, and so I will find out when I get there? There's no plan. There's no plan. So me personally, dealing with my athletes, dealing with my clients, dealing with myself, is that you have to make conscious decisions, and that's one of the things it's hard to in this world with instant gratification, because everything's at the flip of the phone, everything's at the change of the page quickly, but when you slow down and you have to make these thoughts, then you understand that, oh shoot, here's who I am, and again, who you are is completely different than your identity. Your identity is your value. Who you are is going to be all your physical traits, the things about you, but your actual your self-identity, those are your beliefs, your values, but you also have to throw your DNA in there.
Love that. What's the value of failure in your perspective? What role does failure play and recognizing that failure and owning it and maybe even leaning into it? I'd love to hear what that sounds like from your perspective.
Yeah, and we've all had been through things, and we've all had certain things happen to us, but what I really come to find out is that pain, and it doesn't have to be physical pain. Pain is your biggest instructor. Having my wife drop me off at the federal building for 30 months, hoping I'll see her again, that was painful. That was very painful, having to leave my bosses and my friends I used to work with to start moving. It was painful because I was comfortable there. Those were my subconscious thoughts, were to be able to go there. Opening up Move, and the first day making $75 was very painful. I'm like, man, I hope I made the right decision, But over time, once you learn to endure that pain and you understand what it's going to help to do to push you to the next level, and again, everything's, synergistic. We all go off each other. So watching somebody come back from paralysis, it's painful not being able to walk again. Then I look at my burn survivors and I'm like, man, I couldn't even imagine that, and I had a burn on my hand. So I do know about some burn stuff, but, it's amazing what pain will do. It'll teach you a lot of things. So when you understand about pain and how you can handle it, I think that's when you're willing to start learning again.
Yeah. What do you do to help people stay present, or what's your, I guess maybe recommendation for how folks can stay present when the body and mind want to quit, right? Like, when it's painful. You said we learn so much from pain, but it doesn't absolve us of the pain of that experience. It doesn't absolve us of we talked about that earlier, the self-talk and this is hard, I'm just going to give up. So if we recognize that pain is valuable, how do we stay present when everything's telling us to quit?
Well, and again, as we put this all together, what happens is that this goes into being optimistic.
Mm,
You're optimistic that you are doing this for a reason. I look at the negativity that's in the world or the negativity that's in sports. Why am I not getting playing time? Or how come how come he's on a single speed and I'm on a 12 speeder, to try to get I got a buddy that rides up South Mountain and he's on a single speed and he just kicks everybody's ass. Well, he's a dog,
mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? And he's like, his thrill is to laugh at you while you're changing gears and he's flying by you. So again, it's all relative, but when we're having to go through this and we remain positive through situations, I'm positive I can make these next 4 miles of the 20-mile run. I'm positive that I can get this 100 meters ran faster than anybody else. I know I can make this comeback from injury, whether it be, like it says, a gunshot or whatever it was, or just even something in life, can you staff that? Why is this always happening to me? Why is this always happening to me? Right? That's a trap that you're going to fall into. That's not optimistic because again, now we go into the victim mentality, and sometimes people succumb. They become a victim to pain.
So I want to get tactical a little bit because it makes me think that I know people are gonna ask, okay,
Sure.
great. How do I implement that? What's the, we endurance minded, our audience is high performers, right? We have business leaders, we have, athletes, we have people that are focused on showing up every day as the best version of themselves, or at least trying to move in that direction. So walk us through a simple tool or a protocol or a tactical step that allows people to recenter when the wheels fall off, right? When we wake up and it's just not our day, right? We got the bad news. We lost the job. We didn't win the race. The training didn't go as planned. We feel like shit. What do we do? Walk us through something that helps us right the ship.
Well, with every negative action, we have to turn that into positive. So we have to sit down, and the first thing that we have to do is we have to have self-talk, and it has to come from you. Ignore the outside stuff, ignore the placement of second place. I've many situations. I've got a cancer kid right now. He was the Olympic trials. Speaking of athlete, he was the Olympic trials. He's an 800 meters swimmer. Went to the University of Cal. He won his heat at the Olympic trials. He did not make it. Obviously, I think they take the top two, so he got 8th overall. I think he was 8th overall. He went to the University of Cal, top swimmer, recruit in the nation. He was there for 4 weeks, and after 4 weeks, he called me. He says, "Hey, coach, something's not wrong with my head. My neck's hurting a little bit." And I said, "Well, Trey, maybe it's because you're in a dorm right now, and you're not used to sleeping in these beds. You were homeschooled. You had your own bed. You're in a new location. So just here's some stretches to do. Here's some exercises to do." About a week later, he called me and he says, "Hey, coach, something's really not right. I was on the blocks and I was sitting there and I just fell in." Well, obviously, we have to go get an MRI. So once we know what's going on, which could be silence, which could be just you, or we're having to communicate if we're working on a coaching level, we know what we're doing with somebody that needs help. Right? I've got somebody that needs help. So now I have to develop a plan. So he sent him in to go get an MRI, right? If it's not something that you're helping, you have to get an MRI or you have to put yourself through the test, which is walking out the front door and saying, "Okay, I've got this today." You have to test yourself. It doesn't matter. We have goals at hand. I have to hit these targets. So with Trey, he went and had an MRI. Next thing you know, it's called Ewing sarcoma. He's got bone cancer in his neck. Happens to rare Caucasian endurance athletes, 20 to 30 years old. Normally it comes in the limb, but this is in his neck. So he has to unenroll in school. He has to develop a plan. And they decided to come back home to Phoenix, and they put him at Mayo Hospital, and they started doing chemo. I think he did 17 rounds of chemo and 31 rounds of radiation. Never once had I seen this dude fall off being optimistic. Right? There was a plan. There's a thoughtful process that's going to happen. I'm a very planning person. I know everything. And I know if plans change, right? There could be this chemo is not working. We're having to change this. Or what I worked with Eddie when Eddie was trying to come back. Here's what I did with my last spinal cord patient. But Eddie, this is going to be different. So everything's different, in which we all are different. So we're using these tools. You have to reconfigure, develop the course. You're going to get thrown off. Trey got thrown off. He came back here. Now, mind you, Mayo gave him all the cancer people, they get a catalog and you get a free gift. So he got one of those big wheels that you see people riding on, the electric big wheels, the single wheels.
Oh yeah.
And so he was riding on one of those, and so was his dad, right? And his dad fell and broke his collarbone on it. And so I told Trey, I said, Trey, don't get on there. You're risky. You're coming back off this cancer. Everything's going well. Your body's septic right now. Sure enough, Trey falls and tears his ACL. So not only did he get to ring the bell, he rung the bell for cancer. He did all of his chemo, passed that. Endurance, right? Endurance, 5 days a week in the hospital, 2 days chemo, come back. He would still work out at Move. This is mindset. You know what I mean? This is the adopting that you cannot be defeated mindset. He's remained optimistic the whole time. He did 31 rounds of radiation right afterwards, completed that, rang the bell, right? 2 major accomplishments. Well, now you've got a 12-month ACL rehab coming, shit. But again, the resilience we talked about, getting knocked down and getting back up. So that's what you have to stay on course. That's the biggest thing. Now, what I use and what I like to use, and as an analogy, we all use Google Maps. We all use Apple Maps, right? We missed a turn. Don't worry. It doesn't just shut down. It redirects, right? It redirects. There's still a goal on hand. That was a hard climb. My water bottle fell out, or my chain fell off, when I was in the middle of the race. That's okay. Let's get it back in. You might be better on making up some time on the downhill or whatever, we have to go. And even in life, we're going to get thrown curveballs. They always say life is a sprint, not a marathon. And I disagree with that still. I always say life is a hurdle race. Right? You're going to have an obstacle thrown in front of you. You got to hit that shit full speed, hop over it, and keep on going. It's endurance. He or she who moves the longest and moves the fastest wins.
So I'm thinking, I love just that kind of consistent, redirection. That's a great analogy. Like you said, the map doesn't shut down. It gives you the next course. And that's a really clear connection. What do you recommend? It makes me think about kind of the mental gym, right? We have the protocols for the fitness side of things. So we have a plan. We know what we're supposed to do, but then where it gets a little hazy for a lot of people is it is okay. How do I develop the same protocols? How do I develop my mental gym, right? I know what I need to do to develop my physical fitness, come back from the injury. What do you recommend people start building if there's kind of the first piece of equipment, so to speak, that we put in the mental gym? What do you recommend people do without it becoming overwhelming, right? Because I'm hearing you tell the story of this kid who came back from this injury and this incredible setback. And that's great. But man, I mean, what a wild story, like that feels, I'm even sitting here. I'm like, I hope that I would have that in me, but I don't know, that's a strong, and we all want to think and hope that we rise to the occasion. But I think part of that is we got to make sure we have that mental gym built, right? You can't build it. You can't wait till something happens. So what's your recommendation what's that first piece of equipment to build the mental gym, so to speak?
It's the simple thing, and I think most people are already doing it. They just don't know that they're already doing it, right? So obviously the first simple thing, like I talked about before, is putting yourself in a stressful situation and getting out of it. It doesn't have to be swimming and getting cancer or riding your mountain bike, falling down, breaking your back, or being in a car fire and being 60% burned. For us people that are just looking to gain the competitive advantage with the mental aspect of it all, cool plunges. Right. Biggest thing that's out there. Everyone's doing the cool plunge. We have a cryo tank at Move. It's the nitrogen free full body chamber that you go inside. And then there's also now with all the saunas and the heat therapy. Right. The body stresses the same on 2 things, hot and cold. Trey doesn't stress on the chemo because somehow his brain's programmed and wired differently, that he's able to handle that. Like you said, some people might not be able to handle that. So let's start. And I think what they've done is they found out the body stresses on 2 things the same, hot and cold. You're in Montana, you probably don't stress about the cold too much, freezing winters, the snow. I always use the buffalo that's all just, weathered, facing the storm, right? Running right into the storm, which is the other thing. It's the buffalo mindset, right? The human body's going to run from the storm. The buffalo is going to turn and go right into it all. So we do preach the buffalo. That's one of the only animals, including the humans, when the storm's coming, everybody runs from it. Well, you're in that storm for a long time. The buffalo is one of the only animals, they turns right into it all. It's going to weather the storm for the next day, but then it's going to see sunny days tomorrow. right afterwards. So we always instill that. Once the buffalo mindset's in there, then the next thing that you know is how do you handle stress. So we're going to put you in. For us in Arizona, I don't really like to use the saunas. We don't have the saunas. I know they're good for you, but I've got the sauna when I walk out my front door, right?
Yeah, no joke.
Yeah. So Arizona people don't stress about the heat, right? I can go climb Camelback today and not worry about it. Yes, it's 110 degrees or whatever, but I'm acclimated to that, right? My body's used to the stress 340 days a year, not 365. Well, if you put me in Chicago or Montana without a jacket, I'm probably going to be stressing due to the cold, right? But how do you overcome that? Your body's going to get the fight or flight in there. You get your norepinephrine, you get all of your chemicals flowing through your body, and you're going to know that you're going to be okay. Now Montana, I'm going to put you guys in a dry sauna. It's 121 degrees, just like Phoenix, Arizona. You're going to have to sit in there for 7 minutes and you're going to be sweating your balls off. But at the end of the day, you're going to be okay. So the first simple thing is just try to put yourself in a hot and cold situation. See how you handle that.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. I have found, there is an incredible amount of clarity that comes with opting into stress. I love to do contrast therapy in a sauna in the cold. And, it's just there is something that I think, to your point, there's that kind of learned behavior of knowing that it's going to be okay, right? You put yourself in that position. It's cold, it's hot. Your body tells you no, your mind's telling you no. If you can just push past that, it doesn't take very long where you're able to recognize that when you have a challenge in life, your first response doesn't have to be flight, right? No. That that you can, like you said, you can turn and face it. I love the analogy of the buffalo, as a Montanan and buffalo or, I'm just outside of Yellowstone National Park and, they're basically in my backyard and to see them, laying in a blizzard, and like you said, that really hits home for me. I can see that.
It's huge. And that's what we have. I got a buffalo. One of my clients, he went to Africa last 2 summers ago. He went there and he was studying, doing the helping the kids abroad in Rwanda. And he brought me back a wooden buffalo from over there. So we have it up on our thing, and it signifies every time you walk in our door. As soon as you walk in, move on the front of our wall, it says mind over virtual everything.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the name of your book that's coming out. Yeah.
That's the name of my book. So our company's called Move, right? And so the logo that we have is the actual handicap guy. This is actually the handicap guy, but it's also an athlete in motion, right? So it's kind of a cool brand that we came up with 9 years ago when we started it all. So then somebody was asking me, well, what does Move stand for? And really it went back to Eddie, my mountain biker, when we got him to come back from paralysis. It wasn't about getting him stronger. It wasn't about his flexibility. It wasn't about his core stamina. It was about just getting him to move. It was about his endurance. You have to take one step, and I use a one in a row philosophy, and this can be for, again, business. This is again for endurance athletes. You always hear the one more, with the running guy. I think his name's Colin or whatever his name is, run one more. Well, I always use, I had a good basketball coach. His name's Art Dye. He's trained Mike Bibby, Richard Jefferson's, a bunch of local kids from Arizona. And he's always said, in order to become a good shooter, you got to start with one in a row and do that over and over and over again. So next thing you know, you made 10 in a row. That's why when I go into talk about addictions and choices and things like that, I'm not a 12-step recovery person with all that. Everything for me, it's a 365-step process because I'm doing it one day, 365 days in a row. Most people relapse because there's no 13th step, in my opinion. They say I completed the 12 and then what do I do on 13? I don't. Well, then they start back over on 1 and they feel an accomplishment of getting to the 12th step again. So for me, I have a little broader, which is, again, this is coming back from injuries, or this is, I had a guy that just did a 100-mile race up in a Telluride 3 weeks a month ago. So his daughter, she's a swimmer. She just went to Cornell. Her dad came in and did some cryo and some compression before he left, and he was getting ready to go do his 100-mile run. He did it. He was trying to do it in 48 hours, and just awesome to see. But, you're sitting there thinking about how painful that would. No, I've done this before, so again, experience.
Yeah. Yeah. We're talking a lot about, sport, but which is great. I mean, that's for me, that's a lens kind of that I see everything through, and,
life is what makes that, though. But life is what makes that.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think. It's kind of the question that comes to mind is, how does all this apply to to daily life outside of sport, right? It's the saying, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to the level of your training.
Yep.
And so, yeah, like draw that through line for me, or let's build that bridge. I mean, how does all this apply? Somebody's sitting here and they're like, yeah, I like to exercise, but I'm not running 100 miles. I got a business to run or a family to run or whatever. How does this apply to daily life?
Well, time, everything's time. So every time's valuable. And that's one of the things that I learned when I was gone too, I was never so bored. Everything was so religious, but you're stuck and you're in isolation, or you're incarcerated. And so you have nothing but time. So how do you use that? When I come back out and I see people using it against them, it's like, that's not true. If you take 24 hours, you sleep for 8, which normal. Let's say you get 8 hours of sleep. I've got 8 hours of work. That's 16. That still leaves me with 8 hours to go exercise, run, hike, do whatever I need to do. But somewhere along that line, and I know we might work 10 hours now and we might not sleep 6 or 8, but we still have 8 hours a day that we actually should be able to use to do something efficiently. We just don't do it. We don't do it. People get caught up. I've trained a lot of triathletes, and they're the day traders. They get up early. The market's done, but they got up and they got their run done before the market opened. Then they go and swim in the afternoon here. And then later night when it cools down, they get on their bike and they'll go for their 50, 75-mile rides, But in life in general, I take it with relationships. This all even goes to relationships. Everyone's quick to leave. Not just to stay in there, the divorces and everything else, they're not willing to take that extra 2 minutes in that ice bath, something got painful or I got discomfort in it all. So now, we have a feeling against our spouse or somebody, our significant other, and relationships ruin it all. Well, I guess Morgan Wallace said, if I'm the problem, maybe you might be the reason, Well, wait a second. Let's see. And I see that coming out, and I thought that was good. My wife had a hat that said, I think it was, so I'm the problem. And I'm like, what is this? And she goes, this is a song that Morgan Wallen has. And I was listening to it, and I listened to a little bit of country here and there, growing up around it, obviously. But it says, you might think I'm the problem, but you might be the reason. And so you look at this in life, it could be your boss when you're going to work, there's something is getting to us. Something is getting to us. So when do we find out what's the reason, And I think that reason is, it's not just in sports. In life, what is your reason? Why are you doing what you're doing? Which falls back on now the conscious choices.
Yeah. It's great. I do. Yeah. The relationship piece that resonates. I mean, I think, there's no greater application of endurance than relationships. It's something you gotta work for, whether it's romantic or coworker or, a client or whatever, you got to pour into it, and I agree. I think we're easy to, or we're quick to kind of push those aside, yes. And I talk to a lot of people that are, I'm done with them. And I'm like, I think maybe it's just an opportunity for communication. Maybe just ask a few better questions. Maybe, I think where instant gratification or quick resolutions are kind of the baseline, relationships don't work that way, and people need to be poured into. And so I think there's a ton of opportunity for the application of that, there. Yeah, no, the relationship piece I just think is critical, or there's so much, there's such a corollary there between what we're talking about in sport and life with that relationship piece. So that really resonates.
You hear the all in, right? All in. You hear that all the time. You got to be all in. So I'm all in with my boss. For me, when I was an employee working at Rehab Plus, I love those guys that give them everything that I got, and they gave me everything they got. So now, coming back to Open Up Move and having my employees that from a business standpoint or from an owner standpoint is I'm going to give them everything that I got. I'm not trying to just give them a job. I'm trying to give them a career, and that's one of the biggest things, even as a small business is that, we want to make sure that we give our guys, we start off with just me and my wife. My wife was a bartender, right? She was not supposed to be with Move. She helped me out and we got everything open and running. But now she's also my business partner. We work together every day, 6 days a week. We live together every day, 24/7, right? But I'm all in with her and she's all in with me. Everyone always asks, how do you do it? And I said, because we love each other. We love what we do. And I think that's the biggest thing too, is the word of compassion, with everything that's going on outside there, and, compassion for your coaches or compassion for your bosses. It all goes down to the heart, So when you talk about endurance also, what's one of the most important muscles? It's the heart. and then that goes back into optimism and everything else. So the biggest thing is compassion, and that alleviates the pessimistic attitude or the pessimistic mindset. Everything is in there like, I'm going to be able to help you, but at the same time, you're going to be able to help me. And I think that's how we all, you push me the extra mile to go, whether it be a business, life, sport, relationship, and I'm going to push you.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I always like to ask some kind of, or I thought it'd be fun to ask some kind of rapid fire questions. So you got a diverse background. We've talked about a lot of cool things.
Yeah.
So I got a few that I want to ask, and feel free to kind of take it wherever you want to go. First one, I know your forthcoming book that we've alluded to comes out next month. Mind over virtually everything, and a lot of the concepts in that book we've talked about today. But over and above or outside of your personal book, what's your favorite book or resource on mindset?
I read a whole bunch of books. Obviously, some of the Eric Thomas books and all this stuff are always good, because he's a guy in the fields and all that stuff. Me versus me, a good thing. There was a whole series, Daniel. I can't give you a name right off the back, but there's a whole series. Again, I try to create stories instead of read other stories. I do read for information, but they asked me, my author asked me the same thing. What are some favorite covers of some books that you've read? And I couldn't tell them because I don't want to be like nobody else's. So I think obviously Eric Thomas, Me versus Me was a good book.
Yeah, I love that. Who's the most mentally tough or resilient person you've worked with, and why?
My boy Trey, the one I was just talking about that went to the Olympic trials. I've got a lot of catastrophic things, but I did not mention that he's overcome epilepsy. He's an epileptic, so he's swimming. He broke it to me one day. He says, it's different because I was wondering about my genes and everything too because of epilepsy. My mom and dad don't have it. I said, well, it's genetic, right? Isn't it? It's all genetic. And he says, I don't know about my mom and dad though because I'm adopted. So this is now coming over adoption. He has epilepsy. He went to the Olympic trials. He had cancer, ACL. I mean, and this dude's just resilient as can be.
Yeah. Yeah. When I asked that, I was like, it's got to be this dude we were talking about.
But I have a couple, like my guy right now, JJ, my burn guy. This dude, he's 18 surgeries later right now. Just had a baby boy, just battling. I mean, these guys too. I've got a lot of the burn survivors, man, and they're also another one I would throw up there.
Yeah, that's incredible. All right, when things get tough, when you're under pressure, when it feels like the wheels might be falling off, however you want to describe that, what's your go-to mantra? What are you telling yourself internally that gets you through that?
Well, you talked about it earlier, and we talked about the thinking, the slowing down, when you get into the hot or the cold, and understanding and overcoming these situations. But the best way that anyone can ever do anything to help get right back into the mode is you got to stop and breathe. Breathe in through your belly and breathe out through your chest. When you learn to control your breathing, and I'm not talking meditation and all the other stuff. These are simple things that you can do. The biggest thing that I do, you take a couple big deep breaths in and everything's going to be okay. It's that simple.
Yeah. Yep.
Everyone's looking for all these self-help. They've done this. I went to class. I've studied this. I had to talk to a lady the other day. She's going to India for a month to study meditation. And I'm just sitting here like, that's cool and all that stuff, but like, you know what? If you can just take a couple of big deep breaths in and out, you'll meditate perfectly fine.
Yeah. Love that. I agree. Yeah, we try to overcomplicate it, right? Everybody's looking for, a lot of people like to think the more convoluted or complex the approach is, the more effective it might be. But to your point, right? Like we already have that in us, right? Just take a beat, right? Breathe.
The most important thing we can do is breathe.
Yeah. And maybe sit in silence a little bit. I think I'm still thinking about that huge. From when we first started to, love
that's
that.
Huge. Yep.
What's a myth or a misnomer, misinformation, whatever you want to call it, about mental toughness that you'd like to see go away? You want to see it die?
I'm sure we've all probably thought about it, but that work hard. Hard work. We got to work hard. If you want to become somebody or you want to become something, you got to work hard. I look out the window every day at Move, and we had some construction going on for the last couple of years across from us. And I see these guys out there digging ditches. I see them in the heat when it's 123 degrees out there. I see them working hard, but when you work hard, you get tired. It goes back to when you work better, you get smarter. When you work smart, you get better. So you got to work smarter, and again, working smarter, that means making those conscious choices. Working hard is going to get you tired. We're all doing that. When I was a drug dealer, I was working harder than anybody else, and I was so tired. When I was a drug user, I was working harder because you wanted to find the next score. You wanted to find the next thing. They always say that crackhead, he's never not employed. He works hard all day long, and that's the thing, though. But when you work smart, you get better, and I wasn't working smart. There's the situations and choices that I was making that wasn't. So when you work hard, you get tired. You work smart, you get better.
Yeah, I love that. I always, one of my kind of quotes or things that I've will tell people is, you can work really hard in the wrong direction all day long.
Yeah.
And so,
that's what, go ahead.
Yeah. I was, to your point, like working hard doesn't always elicit the response you're looking for, right? You got to work in the right direction, clear on what you want.
And we see everybody, hashtag the struggle's real, right? Hashtag the struggle's real. Yes, the struggle, and just for what you said, I'll point out that the struggle's real when you're struggling in the right direction. I struggle every day. But I'm trying to get this book out. I'm trying to build my business. I'm trying to reach out to people. I'm trying to train people. It's a struggle, but guess what? I'm smart at how I plan my days. I'm smart at how I go about everything. And for me, it's just occupied. I'm very busy, but I'm busy doing the things that you want to do. It's not a struggle. It's a success.
Yeah. Love that. All right. Last one. What's one thing that you wish every athlete would stop doing today?
Playing for the camera, everybody's playing for the camera nowadays. I've got a lot. I've got a kid right now, Bruce Branch. He's the number one basketball player in the country in the class of 2027, junior in high school. Man, this kid is just working his butt off. And we talk about character all day long. And it takes a team. And that's one of the things. He's just moved. He went to Florida, so he's playing high school basketball in Florida. So he's run over there to have a new team. But he's not just playing for himself. He's playing for the team, and he's playing to actually go to college and hopefully make it to the NBAs. I have a lot of people that just play for them, and man, why didn't I, hey, look at this picture, the social media, the filters, So for me, quit playing for the camera, quit playing for the gram, man, and start playing for the reason.
I love that. Well, Chad, this has been awesome. I appreciate you sharing your story. I appreciate you sharing your insights, and no doubt this one's been packed, lots of great takeaways, and grateful for everything you've been through and your willingness to share your story to help other people.
I've been very fortunate to put myself in positions that other people haven't, and getting out of them, and so that's one of the things when I relay my messages, in my book, the biggest thing is the 10 codes to transform your life, and they said, well, how do you know that this is going to work? I said, because I've done it. I have done these things, and the best thing that you can do is that you have to do it. So with that, again, simplicity, breathing, the ice bath, things that we discussed today, hey, if I could do it, I know y'all can do it.
I love it. And last but not least, tell people, let us know where and when can we find your book, Mind Over Virtually Everything, 10 Codes to Transform Your Life. When can we get a hold of it, and where can I find it?
Next month, it's coming out October 28th on Amazon. It's going to be out there, hardback, paperback, and ebook. It's taken me 16 months to write it. I've got a great story. It came out excellent, not just because I wrote it. I've read it many times, and I've had other people read it already. And it's just a great book of transformation that gives you some great tools and codes. October 28th on Amazon, it'll be out for sure. And November 1st, if you want to come to Phoenix, we're having a book signing party. So we'll be having some books available there too. So but Amazon will be the biggest thing. That'll be where it's going to be coming from.
Love it. Cool. Well, I can't wait to get my hands on it. Thanks again, Chad. Appreciate your time,
Taylor,
expertise, and your story. We'll talk to you soon.
I appreciate you, Taylor. Thanks for having me.